Oh, you're talking.
So, we are live and we're gonna call the meeting to order. It's Thursday morning, February 21st. And we have the Livestock Care Standards Advisory Council with us this morning. And I want to apologize, our floor time took up a little more time than we anticipated. So especially with running a little late. And so we'll run around the room and introduce ourselves. We have one member, Senator Weiner from Burlington or Chittenden County on the Zoom line. So
Yeah, Brian Collmore representing the Rutland District.
Irene,
You're muted. You're muted, Irene.
Thank you, sorry. Irene Renner, Chittenden North, including Fairfax.
Brian Campion, Bennington County.
Rich Westman, I'm from Lamoille County.
and I'm Bobby Starr from Orleans County. So welcome, and did you have a particular order you wanted to go in presenting or
Well, we wanted to provide you all with some
overview?
updates and an overview of the council for those of you who might not be terribly familiar with us yet. So,
Yeah, we have 3 new members,
Yes.
so that'll be excellent.
yes.
And-
Maybe, do you want, we have the 3 of us wearing our hats of Livestock Council here and then others joining virtually.
Yeah, introduce them if you would.
Yeah, well, so for the record, my name is Krista Hawes, state veterinarian with the Agency of Agriculture, but here as a member of the Livestock Care Standards Advisory Council and our new chair.
Nicole Dubuque, and I am the Director of Administrative Services, which was previously Diane Boswell's position, and also here I'm captain of the committee today.
I'm Ruth Blawico. I'm retired from a job as a veterinarian at the University of Vermont. So I think I'm representing livestock interests at the University of Vermont.
Yes.
And you have some members on.
Yes, and I can't, let's see, let's just go around the horn if folks are with us. Eliza, you want to introduce yourself since you're front and center on the screen here.
Hi, I'm Eliza Redford. I have a large horse farm in Charlotte, and I breed and raise and train dressage bred horses. I also do a bunch of boarding, and I went to UVM for both undergrad and graduate school in animal science.
Joanne, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Joanne Nichols. I work for the Humane Society of Chittenden County, and one of my roles there is I'm their humane investigator.
Thanks, Joanne. Christina.
I am Christina Ashley, retired from full-time law enforcement with Essex Police, full-time for over 33 years, kind of representing a law enforcement component.
Thanks, Christina. Linda, are there others whose swears aren't showing up but who could be signed in, or is this everybody? This is everyone.
Daniel.
Daniel and Kat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not members of the Livestock
Oh.
Council.
Are you a guest, Daniel, to listen or?
They're here for the next hearing.
Oh.
They're signing in early for your 11 o'clock,
Oh.
perhaps. Okay, got it. So we have, so the
You can call your chairs up too.
Sure, perfect. So not all of the members of the Livestock Council are here today, but thanks for the opportunity to introduce ourselves in this context, or reintroduce ourselves as the case may be. So just as a quick overview, excuse me, the Livestock Council is a 14-member advisory body, and you all put us in place in 2009. The language and statute was enacted, and so this body has been working since that time. So it's a 14-member body with various representatives from different sectors in the livestock and poultry industry, and our purpose is to advise you at your request on issues involving livestock handling and or management, and that's to include poultry, and also provide the same to the Secretary of Agriculture. And the point of the council, we're not a regulatory body or an enforcement body, but again, act in a consultative or advisement kind of capacity. And the idea is that the 14 members who are on the council represent a diversity of animal agricultural sectors and related fields within Vermont. So if you request assistance from the Livestock Council, you presumably are getting kind of a number of different perspectives all in one shot. And we have provided guidance and feedback to you over the years. The members are appointed by the governor, the Committee on Committees, as well as the Speaker of the House. So your body has several appointees on this committee, and appointed to 3-year terms with a maximum of 2 full terms. We do, I will say, have a number of members who are doing their philanthropic duty by staying beyond the term limits. With COVID and other things, it's sometimes been challenging to get new members reappointed. So the ones we currently have signed up have really gone above and beyond and have participated, some of them for a fairly long time, which is wonderful. We also provide, we can engage in education and outreach activities, and we've done some of those over the years, and I brought some examples, but Rich, I can hand these around if you want to maybe just give an orientation.
Sure, it's one packet.
Yeah, one's good. And I apologize for the trifold brochures. It's not the Livestock Council that is the deficit there. It's my printing capability. So if you open the small bifold, excuse me, you will find that the intersection is upside down, and that's not normally how they look. I just ran out of time to try and figure out the printing.
But these are all available online for people to access. So we've printed out copies and made them available, for instance, at livestock auction places and Vermont Veterinary Medical Association meetings and things like that. But really, in this day and age, having something on the web is the best way to make it accessible to people. So the transportation guidelines were developed quite a while ago. Those of you who might remember, there was an incident with some misuse of baby calves at a slaughter plant. And we, over the ensuing years after that, we developed these guidelines. It's just basically an informational piece on best management practices in transporting young
Question about
calves.
that.
Sure.
So you advise, and so do we know if any of these are sort of being used, or is it kind of like just guidelines that you hope people will use?
Well, we don't do any enforcement.
Right.
But we
They know people that do.
Right.
Yeah. And we do, for instance, a person who recently retired from the council was actually, I think Marcy retired, right? She was actually the owner of a stockyards, of an auction barn, and so she, for instance, had her truckers, gave one of these to all of her truckers, had them available to people, to customers that brought animals in. So
Education process.
It's an education process, right?
Thank you.
So, and then we talked, over the years, we talked a lot about prescriptive sorts of standards with regards to housing and feeding and managing livestock species. And we always kind of came down to the issue that if animals look good, if they maintain good body condition, if their coats are nice and they stay healthy, then obviously, even if they're, for instance, out in a pasture, they are being well cared for. And so we talked about some, what's the word? The sort of production measures of whether or not animals had welfare deficiencies. And so we developed body condition scoring materials. Body condition scoring is just a way of determining that animals are maintaining adequate body weight, for want of a better term. So this was sort of meant to be a guideline for law enforcement and humane officers about, how do you know if cattle or horses are adequately nourished and adequately housed, and just, you can tell with a little bit of training, you can tell just from the appearance of the animals. And so this is, I guess, our most recent.
That is the most recent.
Production piece.
Yeah.
So.
And we did share that with, there's the humane officer training that happens every year down at the police academy. That is alluded to, or trainings like it are alluded to in statute as being a requirement for non-law enforcement officers to qualify as humane officers. So at last year's training, we had a stack of these and gave them out to people, and they seemed to be well received. And then the organizer of that training took off. She said, "Where did you get those? Let me have a stack of them, because there are tons of people I can give these out to." So that they've gotten, I think, a lot of street cred. Yeah. Again, the version where nothing's upside down.
I just love it.
I know. I'm sorry. The IT component of the world gets me.
Get to the bottom, then tip it over.
I love it. It's great.
It monitors people's dexterity. And then other things we weighed in on, if you will remember, the swine gestation crate discussion, whether those should be allowable in Vermont, bovine tail docking, other issues that the legislature has reached out to us about. But my apologies, I didn't.
Oh, no problem. So where are so these are advisory, where are the guidelines that have to be followed?
Those are in statute in title, but not in Title VI, not in the agricultural statutes. They are in most of them are in Title 13, and then some in Title 20. And there's been lots of discussion over the years about how prescriptive versus non to make those. So you're not going to find the level of detail that is in a brochure such as this, but that's where those are located. Then there are some rather antiquated state rules that exist, but I will say many of those, or the couple of rules that do exist on livestock transport, have been since superseded by national regulatory frameworks that people have to adhere to. So primarily in statute.
Thank you.
Do you get more calls with new people moving to Vermont, and like a winter like this, a lot of animals have been out a lot. So do you get any calls on, isn't it too cold for animals to be out?
We do at the Agency of Agriculture, and because it's the humane officers that follow up with those investigations, and then we assist them, we collaborate with whomever the humane officer might be in the particular town. And now the Department of Fish and Wildlife, game warden staff, because they're helping out Vermont State Police officers on some of those as well. We're collaborating more with those. But yes, we get calls. This is a popular time of the year for those calls, and because of the temperatures and just the snow cover, the ice. Mud season is also a pretty common time of year for some of those concerns to come in.
Probably better for them to be undercover during mud season than it is in weather like we're having this winter. To get out that mud. And livestock do a great job of, if they've been allowed to acclimate to the environment, as you know, they fare quite well. And sometimes cooping them up in a closed, nice, what we would think of as a comfy barn
with no ventilation
Be
and other
dangerous.
things can be
Exactly.
really
Very
health threatening
Yeah.
for them, so.
Do you have to house your animals inside?
Yeah, so usually they ask me any questions related to farming because I have about 12 chickens.
Yes.
These guys are the real farm.
Yeah.
But they like chicken yard. But yes, I do have a chicken coop. But it's interesting, those hens, you know, in those cold weather, you know, they do not come out, but they
No,
love this.
they-
They
yeah,
love
The
this.
sunshine.
They
The sun
love
coming
this, and they
out.
go anywhere, they go everywhere.
Yeah.
Do you have a sign, Campion Farms?
Open range.
That's right.
Premise ID.
That's the thing about, you know, it's great in Vermont having, you know, get some chickens, yes.
And we have
We're
seen an
lucky.
uptick in that with the homesteading operations,
Oh,
with
yeah,
more and
yeah,
more people
yeah.
getting a couple of head of pigs or a couple
Yeah.
of chickens for their own egg consumption, so.
Senator
there's-
Sears usually makes a complaint against my place, you know, a couple times a year. He
Oh.
sees the.
Anybody calls you.
Oh, he doesn't.
So are you getting any calls on new issues that we should be aware of?
I would default to others here who are serving in that capacity as well. Like I know Joanne Nichols is a humane officer by definition. The calls that the agency has gotten have been category wise fairly consistent. But Joanne, have you seen any new or unusual categories of things come to your attention?
Not anything new. The only thing that's kind of a hot topic right now is that goat situation that happened in Charlotte. But that seems to be pretty prevalent right now.
What was that one?
That was the baby goat.
Yeah.
And was the agency called for that?
There was an agency
started.
representative.
Yes, one of our animal health specialists assisted in going to that property. So yes, that was back in the summer, right, Joanne?
Yeah, it was over the summer.
Yeah, it started in the summer. So yes, that's the situation. I believe I know there was an article in BT Digger about it most recently.
It must have been, Rich.
No, I saw that, but, no, yeah.
But that was in the summer and they had inadequate food.
There were issues alleged with the baby goats, with the kid goats, about whether they were getting adequate and appropriate type of feed, whether they were getting adequate milk or milk replacer, and so it was looked into for that reason.
Right.
Was there anything, when you look back, that the agency could have done, or was it just the agency was called and the agency came and the agency of ag recognized that the goats had died? Or was there a prior call, or do you know anything about that? in terms of
We
our
have
review?
records on that, and I'd have to look back at the exact dates, but my recollection, I mean, I think what that situation highlighted is
Yeah.
a frustration that I and others in different sectors share, and that is that there isn't a one-stop shop for those kinds of calls. So I am aware that the person who was concerned about those goats had to really beat the bushes to get to the right person. And then there were logistics with somebody owning the property being different than the person who owned the goats, and so on and so forth. So there were some hoops to jump through in that regard. But the role that the agency serves, and this is not a misunderstanding, but just it's a common belief among some that the Agency of Agriculture investigates those criminal allegations, because they are considered criminal allegations, animal welfare related things. And we're not vested with that
Who
authority.
does that go to?
So that goes to the humane officers,
Society,
and who can serve as a humane officer differs across the state of Vermont.
Okay, so there's
So-
some inconsistency.
So there are some inconsistencies depending on which town the concern is in as to who serves in that capacity. And that is a frustrating point. So if someone has a concern about the well-being of an animal or group of animals, they then first have to determine, okay, who is serving as the person who can look into this at my request in my particular town. And there's a lot of variability there. So some of the conversations that have happened in recent years have been around, is there a better way to set up the system in Vermont? And or isn't there? So it can be challenging for people who are concerned about animals in a group.
Certainly, I would think it's different than domestic animals, dogs, cats, stuff like, and agricultural. And because there's a huge difference.
Right.
Yeah, and some training for those officers to recognize, some people will say, hey, the horse didn't have a blanket on, but the horse shouldn't have a blanket on, that kind of thing.
I had a calf, this year, with 30 head of beef cattle. And about 10 days before we were ready to ship the cattle, we went up to change the fence and move them in their paddock. And there's a calf. And the calf in with the, and I'm like, oh God. And my young partner who's with me, we, so the day comes to get rid of the cattle, and what we're figuring is get rid of the cattle and we'll be able to catch the calf because the calf will get hungry and we'll be able to feed it. It took us, oh my God, it took us over 2.5 months. And we're thinking the coyotes are gonna get the thing and we're all this stuff. And finally, the only reason we got the calf was we kept putting hay out and we enticed it in the barn and we got the barn door shut. But this was 2.5 months later. And everybody in the neighborhood is calling. They called the health officer in town. The calf's coming down drinking water in the ditch. We're doing, and we chased that calf forever. I'm in California over Thanksgiving and people are calling me and they're saying, and one neighbor called and said, we can catch the calf. I said, well, go right ahead. Come on, help me. Be my guest. Be my guest. We finally got it. It's,
That must have been pretty wild.
well, just,
It's like a Montana beef.
Yeah, right.
oh, it was wild, but,
2.5 months.
there she is now. She doesn't look too healthy, unhealthy.
I know, she doesn't. She
There-
looks
she's
nice.
right there.
Oh, geez,
Nice
yeah.
and round.
But we named her Forrest, Run Forrest Run. But people called incessantly, they called the alerts up, they called everything, and it's like, I can't catch her. I've been trying, there she is.
Oh.
Yeah.
We finally got her, but it would be to call the health officer or in town, or the animal control officer in town, they call about dogs.
Yeah.
They don't call about
Yeah.
agricultural animals. What I would have said if you called me from the ag department is tell me how to catch her and I'll do it.
So is there any issues that any of you feel that we should be up to speed on, or that you need, upgrades or changing or updates? Because sometimes, we only see you once a year and maybe twice on a slow year, but.
Well, before COVID, the council generally would meet 4 times a year. And that was in part necessitated because there were requests that would come from your committee, Senator, or your sister committee on the House side. So one question we had for you is whether you anticipate or whether you're currently aware of anything that you would require or benefit from input from the council on. Again, this topic of the structure of animal welfare response in Vermont, that's one that I know is currently being discussed, but yeah.
Other than that, it's been going pretty good, or we would have heard something, because we're scattered from up north, to Rutland, to Bennington, all down through Franklin, Chittenden County, and it has been going pretty well, I think, for the most part. And there was a while there, we had you folks working on all kinds of issues, from pig crates to
Yep.
horses and.
And I know on-farm slaughter discussions, the council has weighed in on that before, but my understanding is that currently those conversations have shifted to being more prevalent with FSIS to see whether there's a ability to clarify the federal language on what's allowed and what's not allowed, so.
Pretty ambiguous about this. And it all depends on who you talk to, their interpretation of the law, and that's been a problem, but our federal delegation and you folks at the agency have been trying to get that cleared up.
Yeah.
So that our people know where the heck they stand on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do you guys think of anything that?
No, the only thing I ever heard about was the goat situation, and that seems to have settled down, and I really think these are excellent pieces.
Yeah, they are
They
really
did
good
a nice
pieces.
job with it.
Good.
Great especially for a new member to learn.
Okay.
It was a group effort, and the interesting thing too about those, the cattle and calf transport guidelines, that was a donation funded effort. So there were Vermonters who contributed funding to the development of that. And we worked with a contractor who was a student, Erica Voog is her name, a protege of Temple Grandin, which we thought would be a good resource, good batch of expertise. So that was it was a nice structure to put something like that together.
And I think these were all translated into Spanish as well, right? We're all.
The cattle and calf transport guidelines are translated into Spanish.
This one.
This one, I don't think so, but that's a good idea. We could
The
look
big
at that.
farms, they transport a lot of animals because, they have cows drying off, if they have multi barns. They have the heifer barn, and then they have the calving barns, and so they're transporting animals, but I haven't heard any negative stuff in regards to that. They usually have those low trailers that GZN and EZL, and they, turn most of the animals sideways and alternate them in there, so they're fairly tight. No, I think things are quiet on our side.
Well, if something comes across your real or proverbial desk that has to do with livestock or poultry handling or management, and you would like input or feedback from the council, we are at your service.
One more.
Irene's got a statement or a question.
Yes, I keep hearing about this wonderful handout. Would you please leave one at my place? Maybe stick it in the drawer, because I'd like to not miss out on that.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah.
You'll apologize for the upside down part, right?
yeah.
For me.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, may I ask one more final? So my only other thing is, does it make sense if we won't have time this before crossover, but if we wanted to come back next year, that sort of training, getting some consistency around humane not humane societies, but humane, I'm forgetting that term.
Humane officer.
Humane
Officers.
officers, because different people might not know different things and just get some consistency there.
Yeah, I think so. If I could take the liberty to also just make you aware, I represent the agency on the Animal Cruelty Investigations Advisory
Okay.
Council Board. It's a board, also put together by the legislature, and has a bit different scope of mandates authorized by statute. But we met the other day, and it's my understanding that representatives from that board would love to have a couple minutes with your committee and with the House Agriculture Committee, just to bring to light some of the things, Senator, that you are referring to, and establish a line of communication on some of those things, because you mentioned the training, and that's important. But it's a component of a bigger system that perhaps could be looked at, or maybe there are better ways of doing things. So that's a discussion I know that group would love to have with your committee, and I can follow back up with Linda and get her contact information. But
You do want one here, have the phone number for questions. Have you sent that out to like county clerk's office in a poster form or anything? Because people call up and ask questions,
yes,
Agricultural question. I had somebody ask me this fall, my cow just had a calf and we're trying to move her. How long should we wait? Your number would be good.
Yeah.
Someplace, particularly where they call humane officers and all of that stuff. And I've never seen it posted, that number posted anywhere.
yeah, I know that we have shared it that number you're referring to is the Agency of Agriculture's Animal Health Office number, and we also have an email address, which I believe is on there as well. But
how would people find that?
so if you go to our website and search on animal welfare, there are instructions for how to report an
A
animal
lot
welfare
of people,
concern.
when they call the animal control officer in town, call the town clerk's office and they ask questions. I'm just thinking if there was something, poster or something.
That's a great
in a place like that.
idea. I know in the
That is
past,
great.
we've shared that with the League of Cities and Towns.
Yeah.
And they have distributed it, but now that you're asking that question, I believe the last time that was done was when, everything's now either before or after COVID, right?
Yeah.
So it was before COVID, so that would be a great thing for us to follow up on and
It's probably been 5
redistribute.
years, so.
Yeah, could be. Thank you. We will do that, get that out.
Did you have a question, Roy?
No,
Good.
we're all set.
That was great. No, that was really helpful, really informative.
So we're around if you need our services, and hopefully this
Well,
overview helped
certainly,
orient you.
We appreciate what you do and have done, and look forward to working with you in the future. Yeah.
Thank you, likewise.
Yeah,
And,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Did you have anything else, Irene?
Well,
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Appreciate it.
Have a good day.
You
Thanks for
too.
coming
Thank you
in.
so much.
Well,
having us. Great to
thanks
meet
for
Yeah,
waiting.
good to meet you too.
Hope your day gets a bit more predictable from here.
Yeah,
on
it's
out.
that time of year. It seems like it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the boots are not mine. You have some random boots in your car.
Oh, yeah, those are mine, but if they fit, take them.
No, I got it.
Yeah.
See you later.
Yeah.
Morning.
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 Hello?
So, sorry to keep you guys waiting. We got caught on the floor longer than normal, so they're pushing.
We heard. That's how it goes.
Right.
That's how it goes, yeah.
Yeah, we should have known that Friday. That we were gonna get messed up.
We knew we had amendments.
Yeah. Welcome, it's, on the billing, it's got Small Farm Day.
That's right.
It is Small Farm Day.
Small Farm Action Day.
Well, we have small, medium, and large, but we have extra small, right? So,
Tiny.
well, welcome to the Senate Ag Committee. And Caroline and Graham, we see them and Maddie. And you folks know us, but you've got some on the screen that we haven't met. So we'll introduce ourselves and then we'll jump right into it.
Yeah, I'm Brian Collmore. I represent the Rutland District in the Senate.
The Green Runner, the north, including Fairfax.
And Brian Campion, Bennington County.
Rich Westman, and I am the Homeland District.
I'm Bobby Stark from New Orleans County. So welcome to our committee. And the one issue that we have before us this year cropped up about a month ago, I guess, or about a month ago now, was the organic dairy guys, and we're working on getting that straightened out and trying to put a proposal together for our appropriations committee. And when we get that shaped up, the chair of our appropriations committee has agreed that we would have that bill take effect upon passage so that you don't have to wait until July 1 to get any help. And so I hope, that's put some minds at ease to some extent. I know that it can't be too good when you can't pay your monthly bills but we worked with Caroline and Maddie, quite a bit on this, especially Maddie, who represents Milton Works and Milford. So you have particular issues that you'd like to speak to us in regards to, I'm sure. So do you have a list or?
We do, yeah, I'd be happy to kick us off. Thank you so much, Senator Stark, Chair of the committee. Today, we also, if there's an opportunity to testify specifically on dairy and the dairy proposal, again, I'm sure Maddie and all Rule and Rule 1 board members would be happy to speak to the committee about that if that's helpful. Today, we are indeed coming to you all to kind of lead the charge of thinking through what can be better programmatic solutions to support and incentivize farm and forestry practices to address the climate challenges of our time. And yes, for Rural Vermont, that means not just for commercial farmers, but also help our beginning farmers, farms that transition, diversified farmers, the very small who might want to even just start becoming commercially relevant in a way, as well as the very large who need to downsize and diversify to sustain themselves facing the challenges of our time. And that's, of course, the work that you all have been kind of starting 3 years ago by charging the Payment for Ecosystem Services and Soil Health Working Group, which under that umbrella kind of left the promise to come back to you with the solutions for these big questions and complex issues. And so you have been seeing the report, and we encourage you really to also invite working group members, more of the working group members, we have a couple here today,
to come and speak about their experience with that process and their takeaways and recommendations that they gleaned from their work on that in the last 3 years, and especially also hearing from the farmers that were involved on that working group, and some of whom we've talked about in advance that they'd rather present on that as once you invite the working group to speak as a working group to you and not as a part of our lobby effort here for our Small Farm Action Day. So that would be one recommendation, and then of course we know from our state agency that we're not going to see the pilot project that's going to enhance the conservation stewardship program, which is rolling out this year, that's already been funded through the legislature, that we won't see a proposal to codify that in statute by 2025. So this biennium from the agency will not see legislation on this subject. And that's why we are here today, because we think we cannot lose another 2 years. This is a big, big problem, and there's a lot of work to do. And that's why NOFA Vermont and Move Vermont has been putting together the slate of testimonials you'll hear now, to kind of just starting to think about this big subject. What do we actually need to do to get us set up to be more successful in agriculture in the 21st century? And then of course we only have an hour and it's a big subject. So if we can come back this session to deepen our conversations, we'd be delighted to, and follow up with some more of the specific recommendations. One thing I want to say right from the get-go is that we all support very much the work of our conservation districts, and that we all think it's devastating how historically they are underfunded and how they continue to be underfunded today, and that we all really support and want to amplify their funding request to have a baseline funding of at least $3 million. We think that's very reasonable, and that's one specific thing we all want to echo today in support. Another thing that our group of small farmers that's been working alongside the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group has been thinking about is, why is it in the 21st century that in agriculture you have this alphabet soup, and it's really hard to get even an overview of what program to apply by when, and what the different deadlines are, and what the requirements are, and why can't there be like a single web portal where programs would be streamlined and you could even maybe enroll and apply through the programs through a single web portal? And why wouldn't we use AI, artificial intelligence, and software development to do what's so normal in so many areas of bureaucracy? You can submit your taxes online and have software help you go through that. But in agriculture, you have to be quite a master to even be in the know of what's out there, and it's very duplicative. And
So
that's
it's very hard to get anything on ecosystem services.
and in terms of ecosystem services, and with that, I think that's a good leading over to our first presenter, who will Mario Machado, postdoctoral, who's written a PhD thesis basically in collaboration on that subject. How do currently programs already cover ecosystem services or not?
You sit at the table and be closer to the mic.
Well, members of the Senate Ag Committee, it is an honor to be here today to present some of my work on improving ecosystem services and farm viability in the U.S. Northeast and in Vermont. I'd like to start by thanking you all, as well as rural Vermont, for inviting me here. My name is Dr. Mario Ronaldo Machado. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Gund Institute for Environment at the University of Vermont. My work generally focuses on the social and economic dynamics of payments for ecosystem service programs, also called PES programs, which are programs that provide incentives to farmers and landowners for the production of ecosystem services on their land. Ecosystem services are the many benefits to humans provided by the natural environment, such as clean air, water, soil and food production, and biodiversity, among others. Programs to incentivize the production of ecosystem services, like PES programs, can play important roles in supporting agricultural communities and rural landscapes, especially as they confront the multiple challenges posed by shifting economic dynamics, including inflation and climate change. Together, these forces undermine the capacity of farms to remain viable, to adopt more sustainable practices, and to contribute to both the local food system and the local economy. In this sense, PES programs are not just important to farmers, but to all of us. Abundant, available, and affordable food is dependent upon successful agricultural enterprises built on foundations of sustainability, environmental stewardship, and economic vitality. Today, I'd like to discuss a report I recently published along with my colleague, Dr. Alicia Coleman at the University of Connecticut. This report, entitled Ecosystem Services in Working Lands Practice and Policy in the US Northeast, summarizes work that we completed for the Extension Foundation, reviewing over 1,300 federal, regional, and state programs available to farmers and working lands managers across the Northeast, including Vermont. The point of this extensive research mandate was fourfold. First, we aim to understand how these programs might increase the profitability and sustainability of farms. Second, we wanted to know how these programs might position agriculture as a primary leader in mitigating climate change. Third, we wanted to understand how these programs might build resiliency of rural communities and urban communities in the US Northeast. And fourth, we wanted to know how these programs might increase the appeal of agricultural professions to a wide range of young people. After completing this research, we discovered a number of important trends in current programming. First, PES programs make use of different incentives, from direct payments to tax abatements to free educational programming. To be successful, however, programs must provide incentives that meaningfully offset the risks that farmers and landowners assume and the labor that they expend by participating in these programs. For example, many programs offer direct payment and technical support for program or practice implementation, but programs that also provide payments for application submissions and data collection may be more successful for recruiting farms, as these processes are very labor intensive. Second, programs are either structured to address single ecosystem services or multiple ecosystem services at the same time. There are strengths and weaknesses to both approaches. Programs that target single ecosystem services, like efforts to expand carbon markets, for example, may have more impact and be more accessible to farms with larger acreage. Programs that target multiple ecosystem services, such as whole farm planning, may be more accessible and have more impact on smaller farms. These trade-offs and dynamics need to be considered in program design. Third, there are very few programs that currently address challenges around resilience directly, and even fewer that address resilience beyond the scale of the farm. Programs focused on resilience, especially as it functions across scales from households to communities to the state and to broader regions, as well as in between urban and rural areas, represent an important direction for future research and programming. And fourth, while there are a number of programs for young and beginning farmers, these incentives may not be enough. Programs that couple ecosystem service provisioning with incentives that directly support livelihoods, such as direct payments, basic income, land access, free education, professional development, childcare, and healthcare may help. Taken together, these findings point to another crucial lesson emerging from our research. The most successful programs in our assessment were those that treated agricultural landscapes as multifunctional. That is to say, a system of essential social, economic, and ecological functions which operate across scales from the local to the state and across time from this generation to the next. What this means, in essence, is that to address contemporary challenges, planning and programming needs to think holistically about how working lands, including farms and farming households, contribute to the communities and the landscapes that we rely on and that we call home. To date, Vermont has been a regional and national leader in pioneering forward-thinking programs to serve rural farms and rural communities, who in turn serve the public good. There is, however, important work that still needs to be done. Thank you for your time. I look forward to any questions you may have. And for those that would like a full copy of the report, I have that available. So.
Yeah, that'd be
great.
That'd be good, yeah.
You and Laura?
You'll send it to me?
Yes, I'll send it to you. Yes. Or Linda, okay.
And then Linda can get it to us.
Cool.
So, in the Northeast or in Vermont here, we're doing pretty well, or?
I would say that
we still got a lot to do, but compared to our neighbors,
yeah. Well, I would say, so full disclosure, I live in New Hampshire. I'm trying to start a farm in New Hampshire.
What?
I know, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But I work for UVM, and from my
So we're
perspective,
sending our money out of state?
I guess so. Well, I say many of the challenges that are, occur in Vermont also, New Hampshire has a lot of the same challenges. And certainly for the kind of work that I do, interested in these programs, Vermont is a place to be right now. There are a lot of really unique things happening around these topics and themes in Vermont. But certainly I think, as sort of a pioneering force in this field, as having pioneering programs, Vermont's also running into some of the hiccups and some of the challenges that other states may run across in the future. So,
well, they may learn from what we're doing and
Exactly.
save them time.
We're always ahead of New Hampshire.
We got going on this maybe 4 years ago or 5. It was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
But now we have the agency that's really getting into it pretty good. Do they need any, have you folks met with them to give them some direction on, like from the Gun Institute to point them in a good direction?
Well, we'll be excited. We have actually in our slate, we'll get to all of these questions. Still, we have actually a presenter specifically about how is Vermont doing. We have a presenter specifically to the question about what have we done to support this work in the past and why is this working group process, for example, ended with the recommendation they ended with. We have a presenter talking to that. And I suggest, given we have such a long lineup, everyone has really just 5 minutes to speak. So that's kind of why, if you want to hear more from Mario on this research, I'm sure sending the report and looking at the executive summary there might inspire deeper conversations with Mario too.
No, we should keep moving along. So
And Senator Sardis, so you're aware, we have 2 members of the Family Care System Services and Soil Health Working Group that was convened by you all, the legislature in 2019 as part of our testimony. I sat on that working group, as did Kat Buxton, who's going to testify on Zoom. So you'll hear more about that process.
Yeah.
So, and we thought to kind of before the bracket, before we look into what happened in Vermont, we have Julie Davidson to speak to a little bit about from her experience with PES on what it's meant to understood on average, because I think after this day, we understand that what we're proposing here is Vermont to yet again take a unique approach on defining what that term could or should mean here in our context. And Julie is kind of here today to speak a little bit about how is PES understood nationally and internationally.
Yeah. Morning, Julie. Welcome.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Julie, you're up.
Good morning. Am I next? Oh,
yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. And just to clarify, I'll be talking about, I wasn't part of the Payment for Ecosystem Working Group, but I was part of similar initiatives. And so I'll just start by explaining a little bit about myself. So for the past 7 years, I ran a small-scale organic dairy farm and education center, and I currently serve as the board chair of NOFA, New Hampshire. I was most recently employed by Southshire Farms, which was located in southern Vermont. And Southshire Farms was owned by a family investment firm called Embata Capital, also known as the Regenerative Food Network. Southshire Farms operated 3 subsidiaries: Higley Hill Meat Processing, Vermont Natural Tannery, and Southshire Meats. Embata's capital main objective was to create an ecological asset trust pilot in Vermont and eventually a natural asset company on the New York Stock Exchange once approved by the Security Exchange Commission. To accomplish this goal, they needed to aggregate a minimum of 20,000 acres of farm and forest facilitated by their regional infrastructure investments into an asset trust. The asset trust would sell ecosystem services generated by regenerative practices on the farm to private investors. They later sought to create a real estate asset trust anchored by assets of Southshire Farm and carbon credits, among other biodiversity stacking techniques. I also participated briefly in the Vermont-based Regenerative Agricultural Investment Solutions Measurement Working Group. This pilot group sought to attract private and public investment to fund the transition to regenerative practices in Vermont. I learned through these experiences that private investment in and the valuation of nature is not the solution to building soil health, clean water, or creating biodiversity and resilience in Vermont. Rather, it is a dangerous distraction, moving us further away from our goals of transitioning our region to a more just, equitable, and climate resilient food system. Regenerative agriculture was proclaimed the biggest investment opportunity ever at an investment conference I attended last fall with representatives from major firms, including Goldman Sachs. I'm going to just pause briefly and provide a brief explanation of these financing schemes that are rapidly being promoted and deployed by finance and tech sectors. I will leave out the payment for ecosystem services definition because I feel you just got a sufficient one from the previous speaker. Carbon markets, which are the anchor of payment for ecosystem services, biodiversity credits. There's stacking of all kinds of credits beyond carbon credits. But in a nutshell, carbon markets are a trading system in which carbon credits or offsets are sold. The money should be used to fund action somewhere in the world that removes the same amount of carbon out of the air or to prevent carbon emissions. Carbon credits generally represent a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, where carbon offsets can represent greenhouse gas removal. Carbon credits are typically associated with cap and trade systems in which governments limit the carbon emissions that specific industries can release. Companies exceeding their allowances must buy new credits to increase their cap. On the other hand, carbon offsets are traded on the voluntary market, include carbon sequestering efforts, renewable energy, and other projects that remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Natural asset, companies, and trust, a new class of publicly traded securities that hold rights to and manage the productivity and ecological benefits of natural assets such as forests, marine areas, and farmland. NACS will attempt to assign value to services such as carbon retention, freshwater generation, pest control, groundwater storage, and erosion prevention. An accounting methodology that will supplement GAAP financial statements has been proposed to account for the ecological value of NACS. It is expected that perhaps sometime in the fall, we will see them introduced on the stock exchange. NACS claim that by evaluating the ecosystem services, we are able to protect them from further degradation. In reality, they are justifying their attempts to create new markets by commodifying nature in pursuit of endless growth. Indigenous peoples had for millennia valued, honored, and respected nature without assigning a monetary value to it. Today's financial systems are built on endless growth continuum, and payment for ecosystem services, natural asset companies, and carbon credits are designed to extract as much wealth as possible from nature. The Task Force on Nature Markets report reveals that the emerging sector could be equivalent in size to the world's third largest economy. Nature-based markets, including agriculture, voluntary carbon credits, conservation projects, and nature-based solutions for carbon sequestration could be worth more than $7 trillion a year, making them equivalent to 8.6% of the global GDP. The Task Force on Nature Markets presents nature-based solutions as a greenwashing tool that allows polluters to profit from financialization of nature while continuing to burn fossil fuels and avoiding accountability for the climate crisis. It is imperative to see through the greenwashing agenda of nature-based solutions and resist this false solution. Nature-based projects also work as a cash cow for corporations to accumulate even more power and profits. The most mature forms of nature-based solutions with the vast amounts of corporate funding are based in commodity markets, particularly timber, agriculture, and water sectors. Undressed, it is simply an attempt to profit off the climate crisis and exploitation of indigenous people and smallholding farmers while avoiding regulation and taxation. Some more red flags. There is a lack of transparency and regulation in these markets. It is unclear how pricing works, who assumes liability, and how much profit the buyers, brokers, project developers are earning, especially in comparison to the farmers who are providing the actual services. These markets add another level of regulation and complexity for farmers to manage while not significantly changing their bottom line. There are lots of risk provision for buyers and traders, shifting liability and risk to farmers who realize the least economic benefit from these transactions. And there is very little information available on the types of contracts being offered to farmers. As in commodity markets, farmers who have executed contracts are bound by confidentiality clauses, prohibiting them from speaking out or seeking legal action in some cases. There are many farmers on the verge of losing their farms and could fall prey to the new army of sales forces being organized to recruit farmers for projects. There is little protection, awareness, or safeguards to protect farmers from predatory practices and bad contracts. Most evaluations of payment for environmental services programs focus on immediate environmental impacts and do not measure the effects on socioeconomic outcomes or on other land use activities or leakage. Some key takeaways. Carbon capture cannot be a centerpiece of any serious climate plan. It has a track record that makes it appear to be a handout to fossil fuel corporations, publicly financing their attempts to keep their harmful product viable. These financial schemes strengthen the feudalistic practices of contracting with farmers, removing rights to negotiate price, returning the vast majority of the fruits of their labor to bankers, investors, and corporations. Monetization of nature further perpetuates the colonial construct and exploitative power dynamics that has given rise to our current systems. It preys on fear, driven by greed, feeds on compassion, and takes advantage of uncertainty in the vulnerable. These systems are not transformative or innovative. They're really a distraction, distracting us from putting in place regulations, and taxation policies could then be used to fund a just transition for farmers. Finally, I'd like to offer some responses to Rural Works' framing question for the day. What can be done now to improve Vermont's landscapes, field, forests, and livelihoods of those who provide that care? According to a newly published report by the Croatan titled Soil Wealth Areas, supporting regenerative farms and the food, agricultural, and manufacturing businesses that work with them can have a significant impact on addressing the climate crisis. Improving on-farm resilience contributes in turn to a wider resilience of rural places, regional food systems, and value change. If we want to support farmers in their transition to more regenerative, organic, and agroecological practices, we must invest in America's missing middle infrastructure that will support farm viability. We should rebuild our local food system, build the capacity of local and diverse food hubs, rebuild on-farm and community infrastructure, and develop local markets. Support farmer peer-to-peer learning networks to foster shared knowledge and technical support. If we want to incentivize change, we need to break up consolidation in agriculture, support farmers' right to negotiate a fair pay price, and eliminate subsidies for the commodities market. Tax polluting industries in Vermont we should tax them and use that funding to support transitions and healthy soil practices. We should focus on real zero, not net zero solution. If Vermont wants to lead the way in innovative solutions to climate change, let's start by assigning nature rights instead of selling it to Wall Street. Rights of nature encompasses a range of legal mechanisms, giving nature a right to have its interest argued before law and found in court and found in favor by court as though it were a human litigant. It has been adopted in countries globally over the last decade and a half. Principle 1 of the Stockholm Declaration recognized the link between the health of an environment and that of an individual find themselves in and degree to which their human rights are fulfilled. In other words, a polluted environment can lead to violated human rights, such as the right to health, life, or privacy. There is a campaign underway in Rome to include ecocide in a Rome statute, where it will be adopted by the International Crime Court Assembly and put on equal footing with the 4 crimes against peace. In closing, I would like to quote the Indigenous principles for a just transition. We must recognize, reject, and resist the greenwashing agendas perpetuated by colonialism, capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thank you so much for your time and listening today. And
thank you, Julie. There ain't questions from.
No, thank you.
No.
And I'm also happy to follow up. We actually had a wonderful panel with Julie earlier this year where Vermont Indigenous board member Earl Hadley had a chance also to share some of his experience and being approached from a PES broker about land that they own in Oklahoma and enrolling it in a PES program there, and how he was sharing in that panel from an indigenous response to a program like that, where the broker was admitting that it was all about greenwashing and offsetting emissions. So that if you're interested in seeing that too, I'd be happy to share the link. But should we move on from
Yeah.
Kat, then the mic goes to you.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you, senators, for hearing us this morning. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about my experience with the Soil Health and Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group. My name is Kat Buxton. I live in Sharon, Vermont, where I also farm. I have co-convened the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition since 2015. The Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition is a coalition representing grassroots activists and enthusiasts, farmers, foresters, organizations, and businesses that work with and for the land, water, and climate. Our shared vision is to build the social mycelium to shift the paradigm of how people interface with the land and one another, to a paradigm that promotes community resilience, improves the quality of our food and our health, and protects our soil and water from erosion, flooding, and drought. When in 2019, a coalition of farmer watershed groups initially presented to the legislature their idea of hiring farmers to help Vermont meet its ecosystem repair needs, I was excited to help create the conditions for farmer voices to continue leading that process. Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition was honored to be granted a seat on the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, which I split with my colleague, Dee Dee Pershouse. I believe that we're much smarter together than individually. So I shared my seat. Our primary role in the working group was to continue to uplift farmer voices that represent small-scale diversified agriculture. As a part of that work, we convened a small farm cohort, which Caroline mentioned, that worked in collaboration with Rural Vermont and NOFA Vermont and drew from and continues to draw from the shared wisdom of dozens of small farms, service providers, and advocates to inform our process. This group of farmers continues to meet twice monthly to follow our work through to fruition. We want to see changes made that actually benefit farmers and land managers who are doing the work every day to help create conditions for healthy ecosystem function that all of our society benefits from. This group met for the entire 3 years alongside the working group. So we had double the meetings. The group convened 2 surveys. The small farm cohort convened 2 surveys of farmers throughout the state to discover what people thought payment for ecosystem services meant, and how and if farmers would like to be involved or compensated if such a program were to be created. We advocated for the working group to conduct a survey of farmers, farmer interviews, and to include and compare the results of our small farm cohort surveys and efforts. We also advocated for a transparent and accessible public process with the working group to include opportunities for the public to weigh in on the discussion. And while we advocated for 3 years for that, it never happened. While a survey was conducted by the technical team that the working group hired, the results did not carry the weight that they should have. For example, the accepted payment rate that farmers expressed in the survey was essentially ignored. In the last months of the working group process, the strong consensus that farmers do not want another program with separate paperwork, monitor, and reporting was finally heard. 3 members of our small farm cohort presented to the working group throughout the 3-year process, including introducing the Conservation Stewardship Plus proposal called CSP Plus, that ultimately became the framework for the final working group recommendations. 2 very critical things that I have learned through this process over the past 3 years are that any proposals that will affect farmers must include and indeed be led by farmer voices. These land managers are the ones who know what is possible on the land that they care for. The second thing that I've learned is that while farmers need to be paid for their good work, including the beneficial social and ecological outcomes produced, that should not be done by monetizing nature. Terms like payment for ecosystem services, natural capital, and natural assets are terms created by the very economic system responsible for the degraded environment that we are passing on to our kids. The purveyors of these markets do not have our best interests in mind. In closing, the final recommendation of enhancing the CSP Plus or CSP program that the working group submitted in its final report is a very small start. We must find another way to preserve and uplift our farming community, especially those who are not creating resource concerns, to receive at least a basic universal income. Again, I thank you for your time and attention in this matter.
Well, thank you very much, Kat.
Thank you.
Hey, could you tell us who you had to turn the report into?
I'm talking about the final report that was submitted by the working group.
To you all, to the legislature.
To all of you. So you have that. So in short, you know, the small farmers ended up creating the proposal that eventually was taken up about 2 years after it was initiated. And I guess, you know, in short, the whole process was initiated by farmers. We should have listened to the farmers in the first place. We convened a working group. We fought hard to make sure that farmers were listened to. There was a lot of resistance, and eventually it was the farmer voice that made it into the final report with our suggestion for how to try and proceed in this work. So the farmers are our leaders. We should listen to them sooner than later.
Yeah. Other questions or?
No, thank you.
No, you got others?
Yeah, thank you, Kat. I just hear from Jennifer Byrne that she will join the Zoom link still. I just forwarded the link, Linda, so Jennifer Byrne should join any second, but maybe we'll have Maddie go first, if that's okay, while Jen is about to join.
Thank you. All right. Good to see y'all too. Thanks for having us. All right, so if this is actually helpful, I think, for me to follow up on Kat. So to recap for the record, my name is Maddie Kemper. I'm the policy director at NOFA Vermont. In 2019, the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group was convened at the urging of the group of Farmers Watershed Alliances, and NOFA Vermont was assigned to the seat representing small scale diversified agriculture. So I served on that working group for the past 3 years in collaboration with Becky Madden, who is a NOFA board member, UVM Extension employee, and a small organic vegetable farmer in Orwell. And our overall goals as participants in this process were and continue to be to increase the long-term viability of small-scale diversified farming and to support farming models and practices that really enhance overall ecosystem function. Organic agriculture is an example of one of these models of agriculture that is intended to work with natural processes instead of against them. So organic farmers really utilize natural processes and species on their land to, for example, manage pests and diseases and support long-term resilience. And one core component of that long-term resilience is biodiversity. So NOFA really focused a lot in our participation in this working group on the need to enhance biodiversity as a critical representation of ecosystem function. When we talk about climate change, biodiversity is unfortunately often left out of the conversation. We focus a lot on carbon sequestration and carbon drawdown in that conversation, and oftentimes biodiversity is left out, but we feel it's really critical to resilient and functional ecosystems. And when I think about biodiversity, this includes below ground biodiversity in the soil, above ground, and in all areas of the landscape. In the field, this can look like diverse crop rotations and diverse cover crops, letting cover crops flower after planting to support pollinators. And at the field edges, it can look like planting native perennial species and leaving woody debris in place that can support wildlife habitat. Forested areas of the farm also have a massive potential to support biodiversity in ways that benefit the farmer and overall ecosystem. And these practices that enhance biodiversity also have a lot of positive ripple effects for the farmer. They provide economic benefit by reducing farmers' dependence on inputs, and for the ecosystem and society as a whole, which should be the goal of any payment for ecosystem services approach. We, as others have expressed here, really have a lot of concerns and don't support a PES model that lends itself to commodification of nature or that singles out one outcome in what should be viewed and treated as a whole system. So many of the tools that we learned throughout the working group process, that many of the tools that are currently used to support the kinds of ecosystem services, commodification that Julie was expressing a lot of concern about, a lot of those tools related to carbon sequestration, for example, really lend themselves to commodification and strictly to monoculture applications. These tools are good at modeling the impact of one specific practice across a single crop or a single production type, but it's much more complicated to actually measure the impacts of a diversity of practices on a diversity of crops that work cohesively toward a multitude of synergistic benefits. So if we are going to continue to have the kinds of farms we currently do in Vermont, and I think that we all want to have going forward, which are small, often diversified farms that feed our communities where we live, we really need to actively work to create systems that support them, because our economic system is always working for greater yields and economies of scale that can be achieved by larger and more simplified farms. And the consolidation we continue to see in dairy is a really good example of this, as I know you all are well aware. So overall, NOFA was pleased with the pilot approach taken by the working group, which is essentially an effort to enhance this federal conservation stewardship program. That outcome was, in the end, unanimously agreed upon by all the working group members, which is somewhat miraculous, frankly, given all the concerns and all the pitfalls and other ways that PES can be carried out. This pilot approach was supported by the whole working group, and it uses an existing federal program. Some of the benefits of this approach, and I think at some point you'll probably hear from folks from the agency that can present on that pilot proposal on the whole. Some of the benefits from our perspective of this CSP approach, of course, originally brought forward by our small farm cohort early in the process, it uses an existing federal program, which should reduce the amount of money that needs to go toward administration and increase the amount of money that can go directly to farms, because that administrative infrastructure is already in place. CSP takes a whole farm approach, meaning that all areas of the farm are assessed for their potential to support conservation outcomes, rather than just the field, for example, which is really important, because a lot of those other field edges and additional areas on the farm can really enhance conservation outcomes significantly. And critically, it can both reward farmers for good practices that they're already doing while supporting them to go further and continue improving. And I know Stephen has a lot of other comments that he's going to share, but Stephen has participated in the CSP program, and we know a lot of great farmers in the state who are currently participating in it, who benefit from it. Which is really important to us, because oftentimes PES schemes can focus solely on additionality, meaning they only reward for improvements over what's currently being done. And they can leave behind producers who have been doing excellent practices on their land for a long time. So CSP actually has a way of doing that, which is really positive from our perspective. I know we have a lot of speakers still to go, so I'll leave it there, and happy to answer any questions.
So I need to go upstairs. There's a group here to
you guys got.
Yes, Castleton
School library situation.
The school libraries and on the state college campuses.
We have you guys come back, maybe.
We could schedule to come back or continue meeting with Senator Stone, Weston, and Temkin if you guys are available. Either way.
We can keep going.
I'm okay with you, if you want to go.
Yeah, well.
I'd hate to meet caucus. I hate to miss that. If you want to keep, I can leave
How
it
long-
one.
You guys, can you come back to our Democratic caucus and?
I'm not coming back to your caucus.
Because then we
You
have
couldn't pay
then we
me.
have a recording and then you can revisit
Yeah.
the recording.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but,
That's okay.
but they.
And
announced the
Irene's here
closing of the
too.
libraries across the system.
Irene is still on,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
we're,
good. Irene is there.
so there's still three of us. so.
If you see Senator Clarkson, just tell her that because of my commitment to ag, I won't be at caucus.
I'll use that word commitment.
Thanks, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then,
So committed to
thank-
what they-
thank you, Maddie, and going back to the surveys that Kat had mentioned that our small farmer cohort been supporting, one of the surveys that was really spearheaded by collaboration among the conservation districts is what Jennifer Byrne is here today to speak to us about, where farmers really had an opportunity to highlight what they think is currently not working for them with how programs are designed.
Yeah.
Jennifer, you next?
Thank you. Hello, it's very nice to be here. Thanks for taking the time. My name is Jennifer Byrne. I'm the district manager of the White River Natural Resource Conservation District, which is a subdivision of state government. We're overseen by an elected board of residents of our district. And our districts, we range in services, but my district focuses, I would say, primarily on agriculture and providing farmers with a team approach to accessing financial and technical assistance. So we work at the juncture of private, state, and federal funding and technical assistance. So we're intimately familiar with the processes of state and federal funding sources for conservation on farms. And so in 2021, the conservation districts conducted 5 focus groups across the state in each region of the state with a total of 72 farmers and technical service providers ranging in age from 23 to 80 years old. People had a variety of backgrounds and farm types being represented there, including diversified vegetables, dairies, row crops, and pasture operations. And we explored the farmers' perspectives around payment for ecosystem service programs, especially the existing ones, and then also did a bit of visioning for how we could improve the existing programs or create a new program in the state. And we gathered a report that's about to come out. I've created a short report based on what we heard from the farmers. And some of the challenges around existing programs really ranged, but it included the limitations and stipulations around funding. Farmers were frustrated when they were disqualified from certain financial assistance programs based on how to implement the practices, if they didn't think they were well suited for their context and circumstances. They're frustrated with the inability to access funds, either due to limited funding within the programs or just factors of program design that make their application uncompetitive. The slow project turnaround can be very frustrating if contracts take, sometimes multiple years to actually access the funding. There was appreciation for some of the state agriculture programs that have a bit of a quicker turnaround than the federal programs can, and can help in a pinch. But farmers really do need that funding, quickly and sometimes upfront, or most times upfront. Insufficient cost share and payment rates really exclude farmers from participating. Almost all funding is only a share of the total project costs. And so farms do have to put up upfront expense. Often they have to pay the entire bill upfront, and then they're reimbursed for a portion of that bill afterwards. There are issues with program staff, sometimes just challenges with working, because due to staff shortages and limited expertise. We have a pretty young workforce, and the communication and capacity sometimes can be lacking. So some poor relationships can really be a challenge in accessing programs. Programs being reactive rather than proactive was a frustration that was commented on quite a bit. So, noting that the majority of existing programs are largely reactive, requiring there to be a problem visible before receiving any money to address the problem. There's only a few programs that are currently compensating farmers for doing, a good job in the first place. And then we talked about some key takeaways for designing an ideal PES program. And here are some of the takeaways. Number one is that farmer voices and perspectives need to be included in the design and the development and the implementation of agricultural oriented PES programs to create a program that's appropriate to the farmer's circumstances. So we really want to have an iterative design process where there's plenty of opportunity for the farmers' voices to be incorporated and improvements to be made over time. Programs need to provide flexibility to farmers and support and space to innovate on their farms. Farmers have reported being frustrated and discouraged when they felt unfairly or inappropriately limited by programs. So they really need that independence and keep their decision-making autonomy. It's important to have a variety of programs which are able to support both transformational changes and incremental changes on farms. So many of the participants were interested in a program that would help with this whole farm transformational approach, with holistic changes. However, many farmers also recognize the practicality of using programs to support those incremental transitional steps. There's also what was noted was that it's important to have programs that provide support for existing stewards and promote environmental gains. So, like was addressed earlier, a program that is accessible to folks who are already, stewarding well their land. Compensation to farmers for program participation must be meaningful. Oftentimes these direct financial payments are pretty small and also kind of dispersed at random times throughout the year. So it's difficult to actually build that into financial planning. And really, it's an unreliable source of funding when you're not sure how much or when you're going to be receiving these funds. They also really appreciate programs with a minimal administrative burden, which is rare, but we can find several examples of programs that are better than others in terms of the administrative burden. Farmers are interested in PES programs that provide an equitable distribution of resources across different farms and farmers. Every farm is different, every farmer is different. And so a PES program should be designed so farms of all types are able to benefit from farming. And the nature of spending and sources for the administering agency actually does matter to the farmers. They do want to have trust in the agency that administers this program. There's some reticence about private payment for ecosystem markets and the sharing of data and the ownership of data. So that's on their radar, and there's some concern and hesitancy around really supporting that type of infrastructure in the state. Trusting administrators of the PES program is critical for facilitating that positive experience. It's really a relationship over time. And every farm, as I said, is different. And so PES programs should offer individualized technical assistance and use the appropriate goals and metrics within the context of that farm. In existing conservation programs, federally, farms need to have a conservation plan in order to access federal money. And so farmers did think that it was very important to set goals and use success metrics, via conservation planning, to tailor the funding to, make it appropriate for their farm's context. And they also very much appreciated existing conservation programs, and they see great promise in building on and or reworking these programs. There's a lot of potential for improvement, and many folks asserted that there's not necessarily a need to reinvent the wheel, and caution against creating redundant systems and programs. So that really did lead, this work really informed our advocacy, from the outside of the working group around the proposal that we had put forward around this CSP program enhancement. And, in part that was taken up in the final recommendations, which is a good thing. And, we also see a lot of room for improvement of CSP to make it something that is attainable for any type of farm. That program really wasn't designed for Vermont or Vermont's farmers. So hoping that there can be a built-in iterative improvement process and an onboarding ramp that really focuses around coordinating programs, coordinating technical assistance, and just reducing that burden on the farmer to apply, across many programs in 1 year. So that's, I would be happy to talk more about any of those things and talk about farm teams and how we're trying to help coordinate for farms. And I think I'll close there. I'll take any questions you have to.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jen. Yeah, it would be interesting for us to know if there are programs out there that somebody isn't, if some people or some small farms are barred from participating for some reason. Did you mention, I think you mentioned something like that, or they couldn't qualify to be part of a program? I don't know if those are Vermont or federal programs, but either way, our federal delegation should know if it's a federal program. Certainly, we need to know if it's a Vermont program. And
well, one program, I think one of our asks would be to take a hard look at a broad stroke hard look on all the existing programs and see how the shortfalls that Jennifer was summarizing that the farmers were able to express and how they apply to their experience with accessing programs and funding. What are the specific nuances on how those programs what might be the opportunity to improve them? And I think there's just deeper research to be done to pin that down, that potential, especially considering that, any new program on the horizon adds to the alphabet soup, adds to the bureaucratic burden farmers face, and has to pay off even more so to justify for a farmer to enroll in one program versus another, and then not knowing whether that farm will be chosen among the many applicants for the limited funding that's available. And so obviously we also need to think about which programs need more funding.
I could speak to that as well, just a little bit. There are, I would say, examples of both that maybe, not in the actual, text of the program, they may not exclude by size, but in actuality, in the ranking process, if they're, a land-based program that are prioritizing how the resource concerns that you may have on your farm, a larger farm will be prioritized over a smaller farm because they'll likely be having a greater environmental impact. And in addition to that, the smaller farms, when they are these, acreage-based payments, obviously the payout isn't as great. And although we know, some of our smaller farms can be producing, a great deal of food for the community and really be providing a service. So I would say, largely the programs are just not created to be a viable, financial incentive to a smaller farm. And a lot of them don't rank high enough to actually access the funding, even if it were meaningful for infrastructure improvements, for example.
And maybe just one thing on that is, even if a program is not explicitly for large or small farms, the burden to apply for these programs means if you're a large farm that can afford to hire a consultant or work with somebody that has outside, provide that sort of assistance. It's different than if you're a family farm, you have to do this all on your own. Just those sort of hurdles make it harder to access, even if it's not explicitly written in the program itself.
See that, we ran into that a few years ago, and that's, we set that viability program up over at VHCB to alleviate some of that problem, but I don't think we've got it all solved. No, so who you got up next?
Yeah, just want to do a quick time check. I hope Dan and Abe, you both are still there. And we have 3 more speakers, and we thought if we give each other another 15 minutes, I hope we can hear from all of you still, and maybe start with you, Stephen, to round this chapter up before we go to Dan. Cool.
Morning.
Good morning. I think maybe just focus on the 2.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, that's good. All right, I'll abbreviate my testimony a little bit. Given our time crunch. Thank you so much for hosting us today. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And, Small Farm Action Days has been a really wonderful program for getting farmers like myself engaged more civically, and and I just wanted to say also how much I appreciate your keeping the Zoom going after post-pandemic. A lot of times I'm mucking horse stalls or on my tractor moving round bales, and I'm listening in, and it's just a really great way to keep us in the democratic process as citizens and as farmers. So it's great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. When we were working on Zoom, it was rough. It's a lot nicer in the room.
Yeah.
And being able to accommodate people.
But the fact that you kept it going on the YouTube has been a wonderful, transparent measure. So anyway, so I'll start. My wife, Carrie Gwalt, and I have been farming in the Upper Valley since 1996. Cedar Mountain Farm is a micro dairy and a no-till market garden. We are also partners in Coghill Cheese. Our farm is located at an eco village situated on 275 acres of conserved land in Heartland, Vermont. I think some of you might know my neighbor, John Bartholomew. I can see into his kitchen from my office. So Coghill Co-housing is the name of our co-housing village. So I wanted to speak a little bit of my own experience with the Payment for Ecosystem Services CSP pilot program. A lot of what I'm going to say, I know you already know, but maybe just hearing it coming from the framing of a small farmer might be of some value. So 3 years ago, in response to a request from the 3 farmer watershed alliances, this legislature mandated the formation of a working group to come up with a proposal for a Payment for Ecosystem Services program. I participated in twice monthly meetings as a citizen farmer, and I also participated in Kat Buxton's small farm working group. The PES and Soil Health Working Group submitted its report and proposal to you last month. The working group reached consensus on a plan that would have state agencies amplify their coordination on soil health initiatives with the technical service providers of the NRCS. Rather than doing a pay for performance like Vermont Phosphorus Reduction Program or any kind of carbon offset trading, the focus is on coordinating at a state level, ANR, with the NRCS and conservation districts to amplify enrollment and incentives in the conservation stewardship program. Currently, CSP is under-enrolled as a service in our state. This proposal rewards farmers who sign on to adopt proven holistic soil health practices rather than focusing on measuring soil carbon outcomes and paying credits. One of the main takeaways of the working group on PES is the importance of biodiversity as a primary measure of soil health. Soil is often discussed as a resource and conceived of as a thing, but we know that in reality, any soil, whether it be under a lawn, cornfield, or forest, is an ecosystem unto itself. Biodiversity is the key marker of the health of any ecosystem, whether it be the measure of the soil microbiome or a survey of microflora and fauna. The more complex and mature an ecosystem is, the more biodiversity it will contain. At Cedar Mountain Farm, we are practicing no-till organic vegetable production and adaptive rotational grazing of our milking herd and beef animals. We are attempting to mimic the processes of long-term stable carbon sequestration endemic to the ancient old-growth forests that once covered our region by integrating elements of agroforestry into every aspect of the farm, including silvopasture, riparian buffers, hedgerows, windbreaks, and alley cropping. In order to meet our conservation goals, we have partnered extensively with the NRCS, first through enrollment in EQIP, and currently under the auspices of CSP. With this assistance, over the last 22 years, we are gradually transforming our land from a beat-up old hard-scrabble dairy to a thriving, diversified farm ecosystem. We are very encouraged by this CSP Plus pilot program. We hope that it will serve as an on-ramp for more Vermont farmers to adopt healthy soil practices that benefit everyone and be more financially viable in the bargain. And this might not be immediately obvious why it's related, but I also wanted to speak briefly to H606, which I think in the whole view really is on a par with what we're trying to do here with CSP Plus. So beginning in 2010, and for the first time in over 100 years, Vermont is again losing forests to the tune of 1,150 acres a year. Unchecked development, clear cutting, and fragmentation all threaten the health and connectivity of our woodlands. 50% of the carbon stored in the forest is held by the top 1% of the biggest trees. New findings show that young trees are net emitters of carbon until they reach about 20 years. And although it is not as rapid as in young trees, sequestration is greatest from the growth period of 50 years to 150 years of age and is continuous after that. In terms of immediate impact in the midst of the climate crisis and loss of biodiversity, the most consequential action we can take in the Northeast is to protect our mature forests. In the last biennium, lawmakers passed a far-reaching conservation measure, now known as the Biodiversity Bill. The original bill was vetoed by the governor, but is being reintroduced as H606 in this biennium. This bill is on a par with President Biden's 30 by 30, 50 by 50 executive order, which sets a goal to conserve 30% of all land and waters nationwide by 2030 and 50% by 2050. The 30 by 30, 50 by 50 initiative was also adopted this past December 2022 by international delegates at the COP15 gathering on biodiversity held in Montreal. As I know you know, Vermont already has 24% of its land protected under 3 tiers of conservation. We can easily meet the 30 by 30 goal by permanently protecting all forests on public land, including state and national forests, which comprise about 10% of Vermont woodlands.
Yeah, so that would put us up pretty good.
I think we'd
conserve land and forests and state on.
Certainly, and I think, as you know, many of us dairy farmers are also managing forests and really coming to a place where we see the forest as part of that whole management of a holistic stacking of practices that, you know, in their totality really lead to land restoration as not just a byproduct, but really a goal for the farmer that then results in increased yields, increased health, increased, you know, nutritional quality of the food that we produce.
This is a little different question. Do you sell any of your veggies to the school districts around Heartland?
Yeah, so Heartland has a fairly active local foods program, and we've been regular suppliers of principally like storage vegetables like carrots and winter squash, potatoes, things of that nature.
Yeah, that's Brian chairs Senate Ed Committee.
Mm-hmm.
And we teamed up some on universal meals. And between ag and ed, we've done pretty good so far. Got a little lifting to do this year. And how many animals do you keep as well?
Yeah, so generally we're milking 20 and on a whole, generally about 65 total. We'll raise all our bull calves as beef animals as well, and we're able to sell that right through our farm stand on site.
Farm stand right there?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
slaughter.
We work with PT Farms up in Haverhill, New Hampshire. We've worked with them since they were at St. Johnsbury as a little hole-in-the-wall operation 20 years ago. And so even though we're really tiny, we are fortunate to have a good working relationship with them. And they'll take 2 or 3 animals at a time from us, and sort of know what the backlogs are like for many folks. So I think this kind of a long-term relationship and being sort of grandfathered in with them even as they've grown has been a good deal for us.
Yeah, so, well, thanks for giving us.
Yeah, thanks for making the time. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here with you.
And thanks for hanging in there in the virtual space too. And then we'll move to Dan Brooks. Thank you, Dan, for waiting so long. I know we've been delayed a little.
Morning, Dan. You're muted, I think.
Good morning. Thanks for still muted.
No, you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you all for being there and listening, and thanks to rural Vermont for facilitating this and giving small farmers a voice. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about something a bit different that seems to be missing from all of these talks about ecosystem services. And I think it's something that's being badly overlooked in Vermont, and it's the value of the habitat that beavers provide. And we, my wife and I have lived here for 12 years. We moved here just the winter before Irene. We have 85 acres, a diverse farm with a small woodlot, and we're right on the New York border. We're lucky to have the D&H rail trail and the Indian River parallel to each other through the middle of our farm. Most years the river goes dry in our section. Last year earlier than ever and stayed dry longer. This winter it's very dry, and even though we think of long droughts and forest fires as things that happen elsewhere, they could easily happen here in Vermont, and we could have a multi-season drought that would be devastating. And we're lucky enough to have seen several beaver habitats come and go in our area of the trail and the Indian River. And I've cited a couple of studies here in case you haven't heard any of the recent studies of how important beavers are and what they can do. This was in the Stanford News on November 8th of 2022, so it's pretty recent. And this is just some quotes, and the heading of this article was "Beavers will become a bigger boon to river water quality as the U.S. West warms, Stanford study finds." And this was a study that was done on the Colorado River about water quality, and interestingly, a beaver dam was constructed in the middle of the study, so they were able to see in real time the difference that a beaver dam made. And this quote is from that article. It says, "The beaver dam boosted removal of unwanted nitrogen from the studied East River section by 44% over the seasonal extremes. Nitrogen is an especially pernicious problem for water quality as it promotes overgrowth of algae, which when decomposed, starve the water of the oxygen needed to support diverse animal life and a healthy ecosystem." And I thought that was very interesting in so many contexts in Vermont. As farmers, we're working to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus runoff, and we've been fortunate to have a couple of very large projects done on our little farm. We've got a state provided composting manure stack barn and a covered barnyard that have been a big help to us. And there's also recent studies from the UK about the reintroduction of beaver and how they shown to alleviate downstream flood risk by increasing water storage on the floodplain and slow down river flow, typically reducing peak discharge during heavy rainfall events by 30%. Not only are these wetlands great for biodiversity, but they're filtering water through dam structures and surrounding soils. Nutrients such as nitrates and phosphorus and other pollutants can be stripped out, leading to better downstream water quality. And that was a Dewey research project in 2022 also. And I've just been very discouraged by some of the things I've seen about how beavers are just looked at as a nuisance, and they can do so much. And I went to the DEC Basin Plan 5-year plan that encompasses all of the southern Lake Champlain watershed from Dorset to Charlotte. In the 124-page report, there was no mention of beavers in the entire report, and I think that's crazy that there's no mention of beaver habitat or what they do for the watershed. There was a lot of mention about something that happens on the lakes called septic socials, where the people get together and talk about their septic systems and what they can do to improve those. And it seemed to me like that the beaver talk was missing. And one of the people from one of the lake associations got up and when I mentioned beavers, they mentioned that the beavers had plugged the alleyway between two lakes so they could no longer get through with their motorboats, and this was the concern. And I also wanted to mention the other thing I think missing in the state is that we've got the premier guy that introduced and invented and trademarked beaver deceivers. And his name is Skip Lyle. He lives in Grafton, Vermont, an amazing person that spent his life perfecting these devices so that beavers can stay where they're causing problems or plugging sluiceways or causing any problems for roadways or anything like that. And of course, they don't work everywhere, and there's places where beavers can't stay, and we have to protect the infrastructure and everything. But I think Vermont can do a much better job of engaging Skip to use his flow devices. And when you hear the term beaver deceiver, if they're not built by him, then they're not the real deal. There's plenty of flow devices that some work and some don't, but he has a master's degree from the University of Maine in wildlife management, and he was hired soon after he got out of college by the Penobscot Indian Nation, which has 150,000 acres with miles and miles of roads and beaver habitat and serious problems with plugged culverts. And Skip was able to develop and improve his devices to mitigate those problems on all that. And lastly, I talked with a friend of ours that's a consultant, and her name is Sarah Flack. She works with farmers all over the state. She's got beavers on her farm, and I asked her what I could convey to you guys about what the state should do to help farmers live with beavers more often. And so her three suggestions, and they're not in any order. She thought that a new category of current use for wetlands with zero tax would be a big help. And number 2, education assistance for towns and municipalities, possibly through the League of Cities and Towns, to address issues that come from beaver habitat. And, you know, it seems like it's just been that programs in towns have over and over just eradicated the beavers, thinking this is the only way. But in Moncton recently, a group got together and talked the select board into letting them put in one of Skip's beaver deceivers in a spot where they'd been continually removing and killing the beavers and removing the dams at significant cost for 15 years. And that program's worked great for the last 3 years. So there's a spot where it's definitely worked and made a huge difference and saved a lot of money. Third, she thought that programs to incentivize farmers when cropland is affected by beaver habitat would be a big plus, because in places where farms do allow the beavers, they might lose a little bit of productive cropland, but through this payments for ecosystem services, it seems like something could be added in there so that if a farm was losing an acre of corn field or pasture or whatever, they could be compensated, knowing what good the beavers do for improving water quality. And so that's basically it. Sorry, that was a little rambling. I just put this, started getting this together about 2 days ago and decided to do it. And I'm not good at this, but I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, passed the test, Dan. Interesting.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know you guys can also hanging out in your, basically in your lunch break with us here. We have one more speaker if we want to give Abe the chance to share with us what he wants to share with us today, and then we'll make our way to the house. Thank you so much. Take it away, Abe.
Oh, we were a little late getting started, so.
We're all
Thank
set
you.
for you. Thank you.
I'm going to need share screen enabled.
You're good, I think.
Thank you. My name is Abe Collins. I've been a dairy farmer, beef rancher, and sheep herder most of my life. And over the last about 20 years, I've worked very closely and on the front lines of quantifying landscape function with advanced environmental measurement, and working to figure out how to hire farmers to heal the land in what I consider will be the biggest project in the history of humanity. I want to start by saying that I'm a co-founder with 14 Farms of the Land Care Cooperative, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about the questions that Rural Vermont and NOFA posed. I want to express appreciation for the 2 payment for ecosystem services and soil health working group outcomes of the CSP Plus pilot conceived by Guy Chouanier and the small farm cohort. I think it was probably the best outcome of that process that could happen as it rolled out. And I also wanted to really state appreciation for the last minute but stated working group consensus against the financialization of nature, again, to which I've had a front row seat for some 20 years. Our cooperative is a farmer and ally cooperative. We call it the Land Care Cooperative, and we're watershed contractors in community with our community. And what we do is we grow deep topsoil watersheds and we practice neighborly economics. A couple of conceptual points is that healing degraded landscapes locally, regionally, and globally includes growing deep topsoil watersheds with massive biodiversity and massive productivity, reversing quickly the insect extinction event as a near-term priority to enable everything else that we need, including water regulation, water quality, improving soil health, et cetera. Practicing maximum infiltration farming. Much of the time, this can be total infiltration farming, and we have a very powerful array of tools to achieve this in an afternoon and to maintain it indefinitely moving forward. New landscape compliant built infrastructure. This is roads and trees and water storage and fields that follow the shape, the lay of the land. Achieving true water security for our communities, come what may, flood and drought, for example. This will be the largest physical project in history because we cashed in on all of this natural richness to build civilization, to build Vermont. The sheep craze of 1810 to 1840, we lost probably more than half of our topsoil, and we've lived on, it's been declining since. The practice of economic democracy to finance hiring land stewards who can competently do this work cannot and will not come from private banks, asset managers, other finance capital, or the financialization of nature. For the last 2 years, myself and an incredible group of farmers has been preparing our own pilot project that's actually been underway in preparation for over a decade. Some incredible work in improving landscape health without much outside help, but in community and with hope for the future, despite the hardship on small farms.
What is it, Dan, that you're planting trees in, or on the back up a couple of slides? That right there, what, are you injecting something into the soil, or?
We are indeed, and I'll have to fill you in on this at another time. It's an incredible piece of the overall puzzle in which we decompact soil, plant massive plant diversity into our pastures, and use bioferments, all to quickly improve soil health and infiltrate every drop of water and rapidly increase the rooting depth and the topsoil depth in our fields. So we use these ferments, we use the high plant diversity, chicory, plantain, and other plants. We study like the Dickens. You wouldn't believe the amount of work. We're in 10 meetings over 20 weeks right now preparing for spring. Incredible amounts of work. We've been doing environmental science all over the land, measuring what the satellites see on the ground so that we can track plant growth from space and learn together about what grows the most forages as a learning community. Some fantastic, fertility, cropping, grazing experiments that we all do together. This is called the Vermont Rip Sower, a tool invented here in Vermont that more and more are appearing every day. That's planting this diversity into our fields. And we are about to unveil in the spring of 2023, we are going to unveil our land care watershed contracting pilot project. And what does that mean? Watershed contracting is when we as farmers are organized to heal our watersheds as a service to our community, with our community, in community. And this is not signing up for a government program, although that's an important piece of the puzzle. Government programs help, and we appreciate them. And it's also not just signing up for some program with a corporate or bank-led carbon credits program. Certainly not that. So this is us organized and offering our community a service as a business. It's interesting because I did years of organizing that led to the 3 farmer watershed groups coming together and presenting their pilot project concept for a landscape feedback learning system in a watershed contracting pilot project. I was a part of that endeavor some 3 years ago. That proposal went by the wayside. It did not survive the consensus process. But we just kept going, and we'd intended to form the watershed contracting cooperative first, but as things worked out, the legislative appeal happened first. So this is coming back around to that. It's just 3 years later with many different people. So other things that structural changes, I want to offer that we are going to be moving, and we certainly have moved a long time ago, from statistical environmental modeling that estimates the probability of environmental effects of practices that you see in all of the tools, the modeling tools that you've heard about for the last 3 years, involved in payment for performance, payment for practice. It's all the same underlying science, which is basically statistics to predict the likelihood of an outcome. And so that's SWOT, APEX, the phosphorus index, RSET, really every single agency and academic program we've heard about all shares the same statistical science, which is not feedback science, Comet Farm. So the difference with what we're doing is a landscape feedback scientific basis in a learning system, a community learning system for effectively healing land. We're not predicting outcomes for policies or for subsidies. We're in a learning system to learn how to better heal land. Because as a farmer all my life, working to grow topsoil and to turn deserts into prairies, I can assure you that a handful of practices doesn't do it. And so our system uses land stewards' observations, judgments, and management records, combines those with near surface environmental measurements and satellite remote sensing, puts them all together in a process we call modeling process, we call measurement synthesis, but with constant measurement, real-time measurement on the land and over the land, and provides back to us farmers what's happening in landscape feedback with energy, water, biomass, carbon, nutrients, and biodiversity. Our feedback science obeys the laws of conservation of energy and mass, which we feel is a requirement for something to actually be considered quantitative or scientific. If energy and matter are not conserved in the whole modeling and measurement process, it's erroneous and misleading and doesn't provide us with the rigor we need to do good land stewardship. I want to offer next another major structural change is that around the world, there has emerged a movement of small farm and land steward solidarity, and with the beginnings of thousands of alternatives to financializing nature. So I'm going to read a statement that we stand with hundreds of millions of small farmers, peasant farmers, indigenous peoples around the world who refuse and will replace the financialization of the earth and the framework and schemes of natural capital, ecosystem services, carbon offsets, biodiversity credits, wetland mitigation making, nature-based solutions, etc. There is a better way, a community option led by land stewards in community, and it will serve all of us to pilot this and develop it in the real world. Yeah. In the last couple months, there have been major revelations, basically discrediting payment for ecosystem services, carbon offsetting, and more. Recently, for example, The Guardian revealed that more than 90% of rainforest carbon offsets by the biggest certifier in the world, called Verra, were bogus, were bunk. Likewise, 11 years ago, the Guardian had run an expose of investigative journalism saying that, hey, these carbon offsets are going to drive indigenous people off their land, buy up the legal rights to their carbon, and basically make them landless in many cases. Well, 2023, this has all been validated. This is precisely what's happened. And the one thing I've learned is that the resource extractors come first for the indigenous people, and then they come for the small farms. And that's what we're seeing here in the US and in Vermont. Even in the last year, it's been phenomenal to watch it unfold as predicted. So as an example, La Via Campesina, 82 organizations, 81 countries, 200 million plus peasants, state that we of La Via Campesina, small family farmers, landless workers, indigenous and migrant communities, men and women, stand in direct opposition to the commodification of nature, of our territories, of water, seed, foods, and human life. Payment for environmental services, which is the same as payment for ecosystem services, is being used to displace indigenous people and small farmers from their lands and territories. The most ambitious plan is to place a price on all of nature, including water, biodiversity, landscapes, wildlife, seeds, rain, etc., so as to privatize and later charge us for its use. And our challenge is to reestablish another way of relating to nature and between peoples. The penultimate point, the most ambitious plan, that was literally just narrowly defeated or made to not happen in Vermont within the last few months. So be aware that this has all come straight home to us. Yeah. Likewise, the Indigenous Environmental Network states that carbon trading, carbon offsets, and REDD, reduced emissions, deforestation, and forest degradation, plus, are fraudulent climate mitigation mechanisms that in fact help corporations and governments keep extracting and burning fossil fuels. Now, it goes beyond the inherent injustices of turning nature into the private assets of the rich and making us, in effect, neo-feudal peasants on the land without ownership of the right to manage and control and heal the land as we need to with our communities. And this is an old paper, over a decade old. But here's the problem with ecosystem services beyond all of that. It's an eye-opening metaphor. For a lot of people, it's brand new in the last couple of years, but in fact, it's decades old. In academic circles and in a web of power with corporations, big banks, academics, big green organizations. And it was an eye-opening metaphor to think of, hey, ecosystem services are products of nature and processes in nature that are valuable to us humans. And yet, Norgard's point, and this is a paper certainly worth reading. We all need to be much more educated on this history and the reality of the ability of this metaphor, this primitive metaphor of nature as stalks and flows. What started as a humble metaphor of nature as a stalk that provides a flow of ecosystem services is insufficient for the difficulties we are in or the task ahead. Indeed, combined with the mistaken presumption that we can analyze a global problem within a partial equilibrium economic framework and reach a new economy project by project without major institutional change, the simplicity of the stock flow framework blinds us to the complexity of the human predicament. So beyond just, there is in 20 years of studying all this, being on the front row, sitting in a lot of corporate boardrooms, I have been mentally mined because people have always wanted to take the work I've done and turn it into how can we make money off of nature? And I've had to say no over and over. Is that the underlying concept of, oh, we need to look at nature and take it apart into carbon and water and biodiversity and phosphorus and put a price on everything? It's the dead wrong approach to working to heal the land, and it will not serve us. So losing the entire framework is what will serve us best. We look forward to working together to pilot healing our watershed homes in community with you all and leaving our children deep topsoil watersheds. Please stay tuned for our farmer watershed contracting pilot project, which we'll be announcing within a matter of months. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
This was Abe Collins.
Abe, yeah.
Oh. Abe, over out in the west, they claim there's big developers buying up ag land. And just to get the water rights to that land so they can build houses and condos and things like that and have water for these for their development. So I guess some of your story is already happening out there as well as here.
It's happening around the world, and we're actually one of, as was said in a recent presentation by one of the groups that was working to commodify the nature of Vermont and sell it to Wall Street and polluting corporations. Vermont is our laboratory, is the thought process. So yes, it's happening around the world, in the Amazon jungle and here in Vermont.
Yeah. Question, Brian?
No, it's terrific, really helpful. All of it's been great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. Really appreciate it. And we know we took up a lot more of your time than we intended, but we are.
Well, we still got.
We will not repeat the trick upstairs.
We have 3 or 4 minutes before our next.
We have all your testimony.
Yeah.
We'll make sure if
Okay.
if there's any that wasn't submitted to you, and they'll make sure.
And for what it's worth, I know that these guys will watch it. They're good at doing the follow-up. Yeah.
And as I said at the beginning, this was the beginning of a deeper and longer conversation, and we're always happy to come back for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you all.
And
Yeah.
stay in touch. All right.